Edward, I have some questions about the novel that Jonathan Lethem wrote, but I want to ask you about another book that clearly was part of this film, and that is The Power Broker by Robert Caro. For people who don't
You
know,
picked up on that, did you?
I picked up on that. What is The Power Broker about, and why is that? How did that book start to intersect with your adaptation of Jonathan Lethem's novel?
Um, my first introduction to Robert Moses was the Burns film on New York, the documentary on New York, and that everyone in New York has sort of heard of Robert Moses, but he is this shadowy, dark Darth Vader-like figure who it still shocks me the degree to which that history is hidden, and Caro's book is obviously kind of the definitive look at him. I think that Jonathan's novel is about Lionel and the orphans working for Minna, but it takes place in the 90s, and it's really a character study. It's this beautiful portrait of this guy and his mind and everything. But not to get too into the weeds, but it has a very surreal sort of meta 50s kind of a quality to it. It has a Chandler kind of a feeling to it, and we felt that it was easier to play it straight if we actually said it in the 50s. We didn't want it to be ironic, and we didn't want Lionel to be like a running gag. So the 50s felt more true to the tone of the book, and then that let us open up into a wider sort of historical canvas in a way.
So when you set the story from present day when the novel was written to 1957, a couple of things change. One of the things is that Lionel's relationship to his own symptoms, he doesn't understand. In the novel, there's actually a pamphlet that Lionel's given, Understanding Tourette's. But in your movie, he doesn't have the vocabulary, and the people around him don't understand what it is that he has. So how does that change him as a character, especially in relation to others?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that was part of his emotional isolation and his loneliness was not. We didn't. It's a great part of Jonathan's book, but to me, again, a lot of it came from the decision to set it in the time that the book feels like, but then it changes a lot. But to us, the idea that he doesn't even know what he has is even more lonely. People calling him Freak Show, his best friends calling him Freak Show, didn't feel very contemporary to us. So it's hard to explain why the book feels like it's set in that era, but it does.
Gugu, if you went through the novel and looked for information about Laura, you would be frustrated because she's not in the novel. So when you're having your first conversations with Edward about this character that he's created but exists in this story, where do you start? What were the first things?
She said, should I read the book? And I said, definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, my first introduction to this whole world was Edward's script, and I normally love to do my research and go back and look to the book, and I did look at the book, but obviously there was nothing of my character there. But that was kind of liberating in a sense because the script was so rich. I mean, really, the screenplay, the dialogue, all of these characters are so sort of beautifully drawn from Lionel's perspective, and then it was, as I say, a nice opportunity for me to kind of research New York in the period. I'd never been to Harlem before I researched this film, which was a treat, and I've always loved jazz, and a chance for me to kind of research the world in which Laura comes from in the jazz era, and that music was really fun for me as well.
I want to ask you about collaborating with Daniel, because there are a lot of different influences in this movie about the sound. There's jazz, there's Tom York, there is what Daniel's going to bring. So what were the first conversations you had with Daniel about the sound of the film and how it would include these jazz elements, both kind of as a theme and both in performance?
I think you could say, as an umbrella statement about this whole film, there was always sort of what I would call test conversations with people. When you say, like, we're going to make a big New York noir period piece like LA Confidential, but imagine Rain Man at the center of it. You know, a certain number of people's eyes cross and they make excuses and head for the door, and those are not going to be your people. Other people are intrigued, and those are the people. When you say, I want to mash up Radiohead and bop jazz from the 50s, a lot of people also say, like, that sounds like an unholy mess. But the people who don't and who like those that peanut butter and chocolate together become the people you want to collaborate with. And I you know, I think Daniel and I met in a bar in London at about 1:30 in the morning. He had just wrapped recording a very complicated score, and I sort of floated cautiously that I liked Vangelis, the score of Chariots of Fire, because it had that synth modernist feeling combined
On a period story.
on a period story with a classical thing. And but Vangelis is one of those things some people might really like flip their noses and go, you did not just reference Vangelis, you know, but fortunately Daniel said something like,
And I was like, that was really cool because we were chatting. I just finished this film, literally recording the very last thing of music. I was so hyperactive and completely exhausted at the same time, looking for a free cocktail. So we're chatting away, and then, you know, you meet directors and they'll drop certain scores, and there's all the cool things to drop. You know, like there's certain film scores. Everyone's like, I want it to be like that. No one ever drops Chariots of Fire, okay? And what that made me realize, as soon as Edward said that, I was like, oh shit, this guy is really interesting. Because for me, it was a director who really understood cinema, and he understood why Chariots of Fire is a very exciting score, because we all think of it as a sort of, I don't know, kind of slightly, it's become so ubiquitous, it's sort of become slightly a bit of a joke, you know, like slow motion running, but you think there's a period film and someone has made that choice to put a contemporary synthesizer score in it, and it's genius. And it means like no one in this room can ever think of anyone running in slow motion without hearing that thing. And we kind of think it's funny, and it is kind of funny, but at the same time, that is like the power of cinema, when you create an image or you create a moment that is seared in everyone's mind. And that for me is like everything I want to do in film music, is those sequences. And to have someone look beyond the kind of like the sort of perceived joke of Chariots of Fire and see what a great piece of cinema is, I was like, holy shit, this guy's really fucking cool. Right, fuck, I've got to do this movie now. Because I was exhausted, and I kind of didn't want to do the movie. Not because I didn't want to do it, I just wanted to have like more than like 5 hours of sleep. And then I was just like, oh shit, I got to do it. And I was just so happy. I was so pleased I did it, because it's such a great movie. I think Edward's made such a unique work, and he let me be unique with the score, and he gave me that freedom to do something different. And that's what I felt when I first met him, was I thought, here's someone who's going to let me do something special, and he did. So I'm like really, really grateful for that.
And thank you. In the moments that you remember, I think I have filed in my treasure drawer like the look on Wynton Marsalis's face when Daniel walked through the door and he realized that that's who had written this score, that he had told me how much he loved it. And originally Wynton was only going to play the music for the band in the club. But when I asked him if he would do 1 or 2 key leads, and we sent him the whole score, and then he wrote me and said, this is off the hook. Like, you should just let us you should let me play all of it. And so Daniel came in, and when Daniel walked in, like, I saw Wynton double take and said, you wrote this. And he said, yes.
Yeah, I look like a bit of an idiot, basically.
Well, this is muted colors. For Daniel was wearing...
I dress like a 1980s TV presenter from Britain,
Yeah.
which unfortunately these days is, due to certain things in Britain, not a very good look.
Anyway, yeah.
Gugu, when you're acting with Edward, you're acting opposite an actor, and he's also the director, and he's also the writer, and he's also the producer. Are you able to remove most of those things and just do a scene, or what are the conversations that you're having? And Edward, as you're doing scenes with Gugu, how much of it is, let's just do the scene? How do you check yourselves, and what is it like for you, Gugu, acting opposite Edward when he's wearing so many hats?
Well, when you're in the scene, you're in the scene. I think as actors, like I think there is that moment where you know, obviously Edward's an actor first, and when you're playing the scene, you do sort of forget that you're working with your director. You're just two actors. But for me, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it really made it quite an intimate experience because obviously there's not 101 conversations, there's not many cooks, you are able to kind of go to one person for many questions, and there is one vision, and it's very pure in a sense, in terms of the vision, and I mean, I was constantly in awe of all of the hats, as you say, that Edward was wearing on set, and he was all over the place, really, I mean, in a good way, I mean all over the place, but I mean everywhere, in a way able to be in control of everything, which was so impressive. And I think obviously this amazing cast, phenomenal actors that really rooted everything. So for me it was an amazing fluid experience, and I think you're all in it together in a sense. I loved it.
Edward, Gugu, Daniel, thank you so much for coming out.